Before Elisa Lam ever stepped through the doors of the Cecil Hotel, the building already had a reputation that felt less like history and more like a warning. Not one tragedy, not one bad decade, layers of them. Suicides, overdoses, unsolved deaths, violence, serial killers, people checking in because they had nowhere else to go, people checking in under false names, people disappearing into the building and not being found until it was far too late. By the time Elisa arrived in downtown Los Angeles in January 2013, the Cecil was already infamous, not just as a cheap hotel near Skid Row, but as one of those places people spoke about like it had absorbed something dark. And honestly, I think that reputation matters. Because once a building gets labeled haunted, cursed, or evil, every strange thing that happens inside starts to feel connected, even when it might not be. Pressing buttons, peering into an empty hallway, hiding in the corner like something is outside the doors, moving her hands in a way that is hard to explain, reacting to something we cannot see, and then weeks later, hotel guests start complaining about the water. The pressure was off. The color was wrong. The taste was strange. And what they eventually found above them on the roof turned this story into something that still makes people uneasy more than a decade later. This is Jack Osbourne's Most Haunted, and this is the Cecil Hotel. To understand why the Elisa Lam case exploded the way it did, we have to start with the building. Because the Cecil Hotel is not just a backdrop in this story. It becomes the story. The Cecil sits at 640 South Main Street in downtown Los Angeles. Today, that part of town is associated with Skid Row. But when the hotel was built in the 1920s, the idea was very different. Los Angeles was booming. Downtown was becoming a city of hotels, theaters, banks, apartment buildings, department stores, and nightlife. People were arriving from all over the country, chasing work, money, reinvention, fame, sunshine, or whatever vision of Los Angeles they could be sold. The Cecil opened in 1924 as a massive hotel with hundreds of rooms. It was marked as respectable, stylish, a place for business travelers, tourists, and middle-class visitors who wanted to be at the center of the city. But the timing was brutal. Only a few years later, the Great Depression hit. Downtown Los Angeles completely changed. Money dried up, businesses struggled, and the neighborhood shifted. The Cecil began a long, slow slide from grand hotel into something much darker. By the 1930s, the hotel was already appearing in newspaper stories connected to suicides, overdoses, arrests, and despair. People checked in under false names. People were found dead in rooms. Some died alone. Some jumped from windows. Some fell. Some left notes. Some left nothing at all. And this is where the Cecil's reputation really starts to form. Not because of one famous death, but because of the accumulation. One bad thing after another. Over the decades, the Cecil became associated with so many deaths that people reportedly gave it the nickname, the Unalive Yourself Hotel. You get what I'm trying to say. That is a brutal thing to call a hotel. But when you look at the record, you understand why people said that. One of the most horrifying incidents connected to the hotel happened in 1962, when a woman named Pauline Otten fell from a 9th floor window after an argument with her estranged husband. She did not just die. She landed on a man walking on the sidewalk below. His name was George Giannini. He was killed instantly. At first, investigators reportedly wondered if the two had jumped together, but the theory did not hold up. He was just walking by, wrong place, wrong second. And that is the part that makes the Cecil feel so disturbing. The darkness did not always stay in the building. Sometimes it came crashing out of the windows, into the streets, onto strangers. As Los Angeles changed through the 1970s and 80s, the area around the hotel became increasingly associated with poverty, drug use, and homelessness. Skid Row grew around it. The Cecil became cheaper, more transient, less a hotel for travelers, and more a place for people who were on the edge of society or trying to disappear for a while. And then came the serial killer connection. This is one of the details that made the Cecil infamous far beyond Los Angeles. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, is widely reported to have stayed at the Cecil during part of his killing spree in the mid-1980s. Ramirez terrorized Southern California between 1984 and 1985. He broke into homes at night and attacked people while they slept. He murdered, assaulted, and tortured victims across the region. And according to the stories that have now become part of the Cecil mythology, Ramirez would return to the hotel afterward, allegedly blending back into the chaos of downtown Los Angeles like he was just another guest. Now, some of the exact details around Ramirez and the Cecil are difficult to pin down because, like a lot of the hotel's stories, fact and legend have started to fuse together. But the association stuck. The Night Stalker, living at the Cecil, coming and going unnoticed. That alone would be enough to stain a building's reputation forever. But then there was Jack Unterweger. Unterweger was an Austrian serial killer and journalist who came to Los Angeles in 1991. He had already been convicted of murder in Austria, served time, and was released after presenting himself as rehabilitated. He arrived in Los Angeles, claiming to be reporting on crime and sex work. And during that trip, women in Los Angeles were murdered. Unterweger is also reported to have stayed at the Cecil. That detail is almost too on the nose. A convicted murderer turned journalist checks into one of Los Angeles' most notorious hotels while supposedly writing about crime, and then more women die. He was later convicted of multiple murders in Europe and found dead in prison. Again, the Cecil becomes this strange point of convergence. People in crisis, people hiding, people hunting, people being hunted, people who are about to die. And through all of it, the building remains. The same lobby, the same elevators, the same rooms, the same windows looking out over Main Street. By the 2000s, downtown Los Angeles was changing again. Developers were moving in. Old buildings were being restored. Restaurants, galleries, bars, lofts, and boutique hotels began pushing into the area that had been ignored for decades. The Cecil tried to reinvent itself too. Part of the building was rebranded as Stay on Main, a budget hotel and hostel meant to attract younger travelers, backpackers, international tourists, people looking for a cheap room in downtown LA. The idea was obvious. Distance the hotel from its past, new name, new branding, new website, new image. But buildings do not forget that easily. And the Cecil's past was already too famous. By 2013, when Elisa Lam arrived, the hotel was operating under two identities at once. On paper, it was Stay on Main. Online and in the public imagination, it was still the Cecil. And that's where Elisa checked in. Elisa Lam was 21 years old. She was from Vancouver, British Columbia. She was a student at the University of British Columbia. She was traveling alone through California, making her way along the West Coast. Her trip had taken her through places like San Diego and Los Angeles, and her intended destination was believed to be Santa Cruz. She was also active online. She posted on Tumblr under the name Nouvelle Nouveau. She wrote about books, fashion, music, photography, depression, loneliness, identity, travel, and the weird emotional static of being young and trying to figure out who you are. And that is the important part of the story, because when people talk about Elisa Lam now, she often gets flattened into an image. The elevator girl, the hotel mystery, the body in the tank, the creepy viral video. But Elisa was a real person. She had a family. She had thoughts. She had a taste. She had insecurities. She had humor. She had hopes for this trip. She had a whole life that did not begin and end inside that elevator. And she had bipolar disorder. That matters too, because it makes the story less tragic, because it makes the story more human. Elisa had reportedly struggled with her mental health for years. Her medication history later became part of the official investigation. The coroner's report listed